The Canadian real estate market will never be the same. We have seen way too much manipulation from our government through bad policy, mass immigration, major levels of corruption, and all sorts of things happening from our government. We have seen it destroyed. Our money supply is skyrocketing, rates are changing, we have problems with inflation, and I wanted to get into this video today because I think it needed a lot more context. We have a video from Andrew Chang, who I do like because I think he tries to do his best to be moderate, but he's wrong in so many things. So I wanted to also dig into today's video to add a lot of context because I think there's a lot of stuff that's not being said in this video that needs to be discussed as underlying problems. So let's get into it.
They did it. They finally did it. The key interest rate down a quarter point.
Bank of Canada lowering a quarter point to 4.75.
The first rate cut since March of 2020.
Monetary policy no longer needs to be as restrictive.
The last time interest rates went down, Joe Biden was a presidential hopeful. NASA finally picked a name for its Mars rover. Nintendo dropped Animal Crossing for the Switch. And The Weeknd's fourth studio album was a hit. Blinding Lights, a defining smash. Oh, and yes, there was something else.
And so for the first time, these
Oh, remember that?
words from the WHO. The coronavirus is officially a pandemic.
As more of the world shuts down, global supply chains collapse.
The Bank of Canada also made a significant announcement today, slashing the key interest rate for a third time this month.
A lot's changed since then. After 3 quick successive rate cuts, a response to the economic shock of the early pandemic, interest rates climbed in a way we hadn't seen in decades.
And worth noting about these cuts and climbs, at the time the rates had been cut and previous to the increases, the Bank of Canada told us that these rates would be very low for an extremely long time. I think was almost the direct quote. They said that they wouldn't be raising interest rates until the end of 2023, so they had Canadians continue to spend, borrow, and operate their lives based on the assumption rates would not be going up. And then look at the devastation of that chart. So pretty wild.
Until today, when the Bank of Canada explained why it was time to start bringing rates down.
We've come a long way in the fight against inflation. Headline inflation has come down. Our measures of underlying inflation have been easing. They've all been moving in the right direction.
So let's try to understand why now, and maybe just as importantly, where now? Like, where do interest rates go from here? We asked experts from every major Canadian bank to weigh in with their predictions.
This is a pretty big deal.
There could be a further one.
I expect another 2 cuts.
That's coming. But first, let's try to understand what those predictions are based on. So right away, by dropping the rate, everything drops right away. Loans, lines of credit, whatever interest rate you're paying, you pay a quarter point less.
That's not necessarily true. That's only assuming that you have a variable rate interest rate and whatever product and credit product you're using has that change, because the fixed rates on mortgages, one, wouldn't have changed, and certainly not immediately, and two, the fixed rates which are moving forward are actually priced from the bond markets, and for some reason the markets are not pricing in more cuts. So I don't know what that means, but I thought fixed rates after this first cut would have fallen a lot more. They actually are relatively, as of now, recording this, they're almost at the same or even like marginally higher for after that cut. So what he said there is not technically correct. You don't just instantly pay less.
But the Bank of Canada has spent years raising interest rates because it's been trying to make everything else less expensive.
Cost of living, the cost of groceries, everything in Canada right now is astronomical.
How much for the gas this week? Firstborn? No, we did that last week. Can we do like secondborn and a puppy?
We can see from this graph what those pandemic years did to Canada's monthly inflation rate.
Okay, let's take a look at their graph and see, what's going on with the pandemic years and the inflation rate. And then let's take a look at the M2 money supply graph and then see, and by the way, M2 money supply is money that exists in the market, and that can be in people's checking accounts, what they have in savings, whatever. But it's basically just money that exists in the market. And as you can see, it started to go up, and that means there's more money And at the same time, our production was going down. We were getting more money into the markets. And then we got this major inflation. Who was printing all the money?
Peaking at 8.1% exactly 2 years ago in June. But those aggressive Bank of Canada rate hikes have gradually pushed inflation down to where we are now, a steady 2.7%.
And to sort of reconcile how the money supply has continued to go up, but this number has fallen, our production has started to catch up, which means we are producing more products, so that even though there's more money, we do have more products for the more money. But then the other problem is, remember, this does not mean prices are coming down. This just means they're going up slower. So they are still going up, and we are still outside of the expected inflation amount. But because production is normalizing, everything's happening, the inflation is starting to balance out even with all of the money supply, but you're still paying way higher prices for those items. So it's going, well, the money supply keeps growing. Yeah, because you're still paying $20 for a pack of chicken breasts.
And even 2% would be better, but anywhere between 1 and 3, you're in the ballpark.
We do see renewed downward momentum in underlying inflation. The message to Canadians is we are getting closer.
Now, it's important to point out, bringing inflation down is itself a bit of a painful process. When you raise interest rates, people's finances get squeezed. Mortgages, car loans, lines of credit, they all get more expensive. And that means we spend less on everything else. Furniture, food, vacations, exercise equipment. And less demand leads to lower prices. But
unless your government has enacted policies of mass unchecked immigration, which is continuing to bring in funds from other countries, which money that didn't exist before, as well as increasing demand on products, and also continuing to spend ridiculously, promise more free stuff, talk about grocery rebates, and also have the carbon tax. Speaking of which, axe the tax, reach out to me in the link below. We've got stores.
What happens when businesses make less money? They can't afford to pay their employees as much. Wages can go down, or at least increases get smaller. And if businesses can't make the numbers work, people get laid off. Look at the unemployment rate, how it's changed over the past year.
Yes, that is true. And you kept hearing about labor shortage, but the other thing is too, this is not just due to contraction in the economy. It is, and it actually should. The ironic thing about how bad those numbers are is it should be way worse. The only reason our unemployment rate is at 6.1% is because the government keeps hiring people, aka printing more money, putting more money into the economy. It's not productive roles because that's not helping our GDP, because it's parasitic relationship with the productivity of Canada. And then we keep bringing in immigrants for less jobs. So then you have all of these less jobs and then fake government jobs, more immigrants. It's crazy. If we actually had the real accurate unemployment, if we took away public sector jobs, it would be nuts.
Steadily up from 5% last April to 6.1% a year later. Wage growth, too, has been slowing down for months. And the GDP growth rate in Canada has more or less stalled for the last year and a half.
Again, they never talk about this. They never talk about this because they're too scared to talk about immigration and the impacts and all these things. Keep in mind, they always say, oh, well, one of our main contributors to immigration or to GDP is immigration, and it's so important to growing a society. I'll even see comments below under this, like, I understand immigration is necessary. It's not necessary. We've got enough. And if you have a society that can afford to live and have kids, you don't need to pump in immigrants. So when you see 0.4 on the GDP and then increased government spending and increased immigration, our GDP per capita is plummeting. We are in massive contraction territory when it becomes a per capita.
Those all sound like bad things on the surface.
They are.
But they're also all signs that the real boogeyman, inflation, is slowly coming under control.
Our key indicators of inflation have all moved in the right direction.
So that's the good news. Inflation's coming down, and interest rates can start coming down as well. Those two things together make our lives more affordable. So now,
kind of, not really true. The reason I don't like this logic and why everybody's so excited about these rate cuts is, like, I'm a real estate agent in London, Ontario. Reach out to me in the link below if you want to work with me or my team all the way across Canada. You would think that as a real estate agent, I want rates to plummet so prices can go back up. I don't. I want prices to go up slowly over time at a sustainable rate where people can get into the market. So when people start to celebrate these rate cuts, what they're celebrating is our economy doing poorly. So if you wanted to give an example, what they're basically saying is, hey, I'm trying to lose weight right now. My arm got cut off. I'm 20 pounds less on the scale. And people are like, yeah, but your arm got cut off. And it's like, yeah, but I weigh less on the scale. And that was my goal. And so it's this broken logic of, yeah, well, we're actually doing way worse now, so we can lower rates. Like, that's not good.
Now the question is, how low can they go? So we reached out to all 6 major banks in Canada. In order from biggest to smallest, that's RBC, TD, Scotiabank, BMO, CIBC, and National Bank. 3 of them agreed to give their thoughts on where they think these rate cuts are going. But let's start with thoughts on today's 0.25 percentage point cut.
Symbolically, this is the first rate cut. Usually there are more that follow. It suggests there's a degree of confidence that inflation is being vanquished, which is obviously quite important. It means we're moving away from those peak interest rates that have been so painful.
Well, I actually do think this is a pretty big deal, even though technically only a 0.25 point cut doesn't sound like a great move. The reality is this is the first rate cut we've seen in more than 4 years. Oftentimes once the central bank gets moving rates in a certain direction, they'll go that way for a long period of time.
This is a watershed moment. I mean, after a few years of rising interest rates through the first half of 2023, we've seen rates flatten out, remain stable. Now we look like we're finally headed in that opposite direction.
Next question. When's the next cut?
This is not.
And I should say, as much as it's bad that our economy is doing so horribly that we have to cut rates, the thing is, we do need to cut rates because going back to the M2 money supply, we have created too much money in the system. We have too much debt. Canadian debt levels are at all-time high. And when we have these mortgages renewing in 2025 and 2026, if rates are not down, those numbers, those economic numbers, are going to be even worse because people will be doing every single thing they can to either not lose their house or put all of their money into their new mortgage payments, which is going to be such a big thing because if people are only spending on their house, that is not good for Canadian productivity. And then also, housing starts will be down, construction will be down. It's a double-edged sword. We need the rates down, but that means things are really bad.
Not an environment that demands further easing at every opportunity. And so the Bank of Canada probably doesn't move in July.
We're looking for September meeting as being the most probable time at which they would cut again.
They're going to sit back, watch housing and some of the key drivers of the economy, see how they perform under the lower rates.
Now, at this point, we should stop and underline something about the predictions you're hearing. They're just that, predictions.
Anything beyond the next couple months is a challenge to pinpoint on interest rates.
This is a time of high uncertainty, and we've had such unusual things happening to inflation and to the economy that you probably can't speak with as much precision as you'd like.
I think when you get
unusual but not unexpected things happening to inflation and the economy, because when you pump in a lot of people and you print a lot of money and you add new taxes and you do all these things, it's like, yeah, things are going to go wrong.
Beyond that near term, there are just so many uncertainties to play out.
All of what you hear, you have to take with a grain of salt. When things like pandemics or international wars or disruptions to shipping traffic happen, they're not only completely outside our control, they often also take us by surprise. So if we can accept that, we can move on to the biggest question of all. When it comes to future cuts, how low can we go?
I think realistically, we're talking 2 or 3 of these 0.25 percentage point rate cuts in 2024.
What's normal or what the target rate for the bank ultimately is somewhere around the 3% level. So about, give or take, about 2 percentage points below where we are. Our best guess is that it could take up to 2 years to ultimately get back down to around 3% or what the bank considers to be normal.
I can envisage when we look out 18 months that short-term rates in Canada would be closer to 3% rather than 4 3/4.
In just about every case, these economists warned us anything past a few months and you're really entering into just speculation territory.
And, whatever it's worth, my prediction is also we're going to get closer to 3% because historically, if you average it out, that's a fine number that's going to make sense for the economy. It's not going to have house prices go crazy in the same way, especially as we know if we can decrease the demand side. I think that's where we'll probably end up. And again, my prediction, which is impossible, is that it'll take a bit of time, but that's where we could normalize.
You can try to model it out, but there's just only so much you can account for. The big takeaway, though, expect mortgages, loans, lines of credit to get slightly easier to pay than they might be right now, but don't expect the rock bottom rates we enjoyed for the last 10, 15 years. And
for the 10, 15 years comment, I think, you might have made a bit of a mistake there, but this is scripted. But if you go back 10, 15 years ago, people were paying 3.5%, 4%. So I think we'll for sure get back there. I mean, I don't think we're going to get down to 1%. I don't think we're going to get down to 2% again, but I think 3, absolutely. Don't forget, I'm a real estate agent in London, Ontario. Reach out to me in the link below if you want to work with me or my team all the way across Canada. Buy some Axe the Tax merch. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Do not forget to like and subscribe, and have a great rest of your day.